When my guest today closes his eyes while holding his guitars, you're in for a treat. His playing is all about phrasing, timing, expression, and feel. He lives right around the corner of Mike Dawes, another guest in this series, but they hardly ever see each other. Well, if they want to get to know each other, maybe they should listen to each other's episodes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Welcome to this episode,
Oh,
Chris Buck.
Man. Thank you. Honestly, like you kind of referenced there, me and Mike live so close together, but our tours always seem to kind of never, coincide, I guess. So if he's home, I'm away, and vice versa. So it's, we should hang out way more than we actually do because he's within spitting distance of my house. So
he told the same thing.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's terrifyingly good. He's one of those people that the moment you watch him do what he does, it's inspiring, but it's larger than that. It just kind of makes you want to give up. So,
and also makes me wonder, how does his brain work?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, terrifyingly, I imagine. But no, he's incredible. And he's a lovely, lovely guy as well.
Yeah, he is.
Which is awesome. So,
hey, how are you doing, Chris?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, we're kind of second night of the tour. So we were in Frankfurt last night and obviously Tilburg today. Day off tomorrow before going back to Cologne and then over to Paris. It's a little kind of mini run with Miles Kennedy, but we're straight off the back of our UK tour. So we've been out on the road for, I don't know, the better part of a month and a half, I guess, maybe. So it's been a manic couple of weeks, but I'm good. I'm still alive, which is a start. I'm somewhat hydrated. So no complaints.
I can imagine. You're now 33, right?
Yes, I am. Yeah,
and you have been touring for quite some years, right?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. The band that I was in prior to Cardinal Black, Buck and Evans, didn't really ever tour religiously in the true sense of touring. It was kind of sporadic bouts of relatively heavy gigging, but never, right, we're going away, see you in a month kind of thing, But pretty much since Cardinal Black's inception, and I mean, we formed during COVID, which was, I guess, a bizarre time, in terms of touring at the very least. But pretty much since the moment that we were allowed to actually physically get back out and play, it's been pretty consistent. We've been in the US, been all over Europe, kind of done the UK multiple times. So yeah, it's been keeping us busy. So I love it. It's the reason that I got into music, was to play live. I speaking to Tom, our singer, about this, and I think his favorite part of being in the band is the kind of creation part of being in the studio and sculpting sounds and sonic kind of craft, I guess. But for me, it's always been a live thing. So I love touring. I love the kind of the mundane parts of touring. I love the kind of load in. I love all of the, kind of various elements of it. That will maybe lose its novelty in time, but for the time being, I love all of it, kind of, not sure I will ever be one of these kind of road dog guys, but, for the time being, it's amazing.
You just mentioned Tom. He's an important person in your life and in your musical career too, right?
Yeah.
Because you started out way back as a Tom Hollister trio, was called then, right?
Way back when. It sounds like a very arrogant move on his part, but it was actually for his university course. He was doing popular music in Cheltenham, and basically the final kind of part of that course, I guess, and the conclusion was to put a band together and launch said band. So it kind of had his name on it purely by virtue of it being his kind of dissertation piece almost. So we did that with absolutely no aspirations of it being anything more than like a one-off show. And then Steve Winwood showed up and invited us to his studio, clearly liked what he heard. We kind of struck up a bit of an accord with him and his producer and his engineer, James Towler.
But you were about 18, 19?
Yeah, thereabouts. This would have been about 2009. So yeah, 18, give or take. So it felt like, I guess in hindsight, looking back, it was kind of baby steps. But at the time, it felt like, oh, this has gone from a one gig band to like, I'm in Steve Winwood's studio, kind of playing around with his gear and the gear that he's just used as Madison Square Gardens with Clapton and all this kind of stuff. So it felt like it was snowballing very quickly. In hindsight, I don't know whether it was, but it felt kind of, incredibly fast at the time. But we did that for a couple of years and then split up. We did the kind of acrimonious kind of, split, or at least we tried to, and then realized that we were simultaneously in a wedding band that needed to make money. So we did the kind of, fuck you, see you Saturday kind of thing, because it was straight back out to doing weddings. So yeah, me and Tom and Adam in particular, go way back. Adam obviously being the drummer, but that was 2008, 2009 that we kind of started. And even post Trio, we've been in covers bands, wedding bands, function bands, etc., etc. So there's a lot of shared history there.
Because okay, I want to go back to the 18, maybe 17, 16, 15-year-old Chris.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Okay, you're invited in this band with Tom, and Steve Winwood comes along. Were you already aware, like, this is going to be the path I'm going to be on?
I think so. Yeah, I think from a relatively early age, I think I've been very fortunate in terms of being fairly single-minded, knowing that this was something that I wanted to do. And I kind of think back to whether there was a moment, whether there was a spark or a kind of turning point in terms of me realizing that this was going to be my path. I don't think it was quite as Hollywood as that. I don't think there was this kind of, pivotal moment. I think it was just a gradual progression of realizing that I had a kind of relative level of natural aptitude for the guitar. It always felt like it came not necessarily easily, but it came easier than other stuff that I'd kind of dabbled in as a kid. All of the inevitable phases you go through, whether it's sport, whether it's skateboarding, whether it's, whatever it was, everything felt a little bit hard work comparative to the guitar. Mm-hmm. And I think a massive part of that in hindsight was that I just loved it. So even the bits which were hard, I just persevered and I kind of powered through them, and I learned, learned to navigate my way through it. So I don't know whether it was that it came particularly easily to me, so much as that I just really loved it. So you kind of find a way to make it work, But I think from a pretty early on, pretty kind of early stage, really, I knew that this was what I wanted to do, and this was going to be my path. And it was just a case of learning how to facilitate that and learning how to make that work. I guess ultimately, I've still not figured that out, but I'll keep trying. So,
oh, you're still alive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, still upright and breathing. So.
But you said, okay, single-minded. Are you with other things in your life like that as well?
Yeah, I think so. The boys in the band would probably attest to the fact that I can be an absolute nightmare when I have my heart set on something, or when I have my I can get a little bit tunnel visioned, I think, on things in terms of, well, this needs to be done, and I know how to get to that point, so I'm just going to do that, and. Whether that's, we're still, as a band, we're still at a level where so much of the kind of day-to-day running of the band is in-house. It kind of primarily falls on me and Tom, So the entirety of our next scheduled UK tour, which will be this time next year, I've just booked, just by kind of liaising with venues, liaising with all the kind of relative people, or relevant people. And yeah, I can be fairly kind of single-track mind, I guess, in that respect. And that probably is reflected in my approach to music and my approach to life in general, I guess, to a degree. I don't know. You would have to ask my wife that question, but I think I can be fairly kind of dogged. Once I set my heart on something, I know how I want to get that, and that I'm going to get it ultimately.
Is that an attitude you recognize from somebody in your family as well?
Yeah, I think my old man was like that. He passed last year, but he was a massive influence on me, as inevitably both of your parents are. My mother to equal degree, but my father was could be quite intense and quite single-minded, I guess, in that respect. So it probably is something. It's a kind of something I've kind of inherited from him, I guess. An inheritable trait. So same with my grandfather. My grandfather on my paternal side had quite an unusual upbringing. He was an evacuee, so he was evacuated to Wales during the war, which is why I'm Welsh, which is why I sound like Tom Jones. He was evacuated down from London, so he was a literal Cockney, in the definition of being born in the sound of the Bow Bells, but was evacuated down to Wales and stayed there. Married my grandmother, had my father, etc., etc. But as a consequence of being an evacuee, had quite an unusual life in terms of being literally dumped in the South Wales valleys and passed down a street in a cot until a family was found that wanted to actually raise my grandfather. So he was a couple of months old at this point, And I think consequently, having had never having known his father, I think reading between the lines, he was the product of a one-night stand. His mother, I think it would be putting it mildly to say that she was a bit of a piece of work. She wasn't the nicest person in the world by a long way. So he had an unusual upbringing, and as a consequence, I think that affected him, which probably affected his relationship with my father, which affected how my father is, which probably affected how I am.
Interesting how that works, right? Did you actually reflect on that? Like sometimes, like, okay, I'm doing the things I do and the way I'm doing it. How come?
Yeah, I think I've always been fairly introspective in that respect, I guess, and I tend to overanalyze things, or at least analyze things, over or under, I don't know. But yeah, I think I've always been, kind of, as I said, quite introspective in that respect, and it's interesting to think that all of these things happen for a reason, and the way that you are is because of the influence of, whether it's environmental or whether it's whatever, it's, you very much are a product of the people that you're surrounded by as a kid, as you were. I mean, watching my son grow up now, he's just a sponge, he absorbs everything around him for better or for worse.
How old is he?
He's 4.
So, I have a 4-year-old too.
Oh,
man.
amazing! It's hard work, isn't it? But it's amazing,
and it's a lot of fun, right?
Oh, absolutely fantastic. He's, I mean, this is such a fun age as well. It's every day is something new and questions, and just seeing that kind of spark in his eye when he recognizes something that interests him, and kind of wanting to learn about that and immerse himself in it. It's wonderful. But seeing how much of a sponge he is, I guess it just really kind of drives home that you absorb everything around you, when you're a kid. And as a consequence, I'm very much a product of all of my familial influences, I guess.
Hey, you mentioned once about your father. He was a guitarist too, but somewhat of a frustrated guitarist, you said, right?
He was. So funnily enough, we've just been clearing out his house now, and I found his first guitar, which was a Rossetti Lucky 7 from, I guess he probably would have had that when he was about 10 maybe, so you're probably looking at the kind of mid-60s, thereabouts. And I remember him showing it to me actually when I was much younger, when I was first starting to play guitar, and it was kept in the attic. It didn't have a case, it was just loose in the attic. Took it out of the attic, and it was like trying to play an axe. It's horrendous. And he was like, if anything, being in the attic for the past 30 years has improved its playability. He said it was always a terrible guitar, but his auntie bought it for him. He was very close to his auntie. So I don't think he ever had the kind of, ever wanted to say anything bad about this guitar, But consequently, I've experienced that. My first guitar was a Squier Telecaster, which was brilliant. It was such a great guitar, not just for the money. It was just a great instrument, albeit quite cheap. But consequently, it inspired me to want to keep playing guitar. I think if my first guitar had been horrendous to play, I wouldn't have stuck at it. I wouldn't have persevered.
It is important that that it feels good, right?
Absolutely. And that you can start to get something out of it, which you recognize, and for me, that was trying to copy records that I was hearing. For my father, it would have been trying to play Love Me Do or Please Please Me or whatever he was kind of listening to at the time, So consequently, he was a frustrated guitarist. It's a very good way of describing my dad, but I think loved guitars as pieces of art, if nothing else. There was always a guitar around when I was a kid. He would pick it up and kind of strum a couple of chords on it. That was about the extent of his knowledge. And he knew how to play Local Hero, the theme from Local Hero by Mark Knopfler. But exactly, yeah. So that was pretty much the first thing I ever learned was an interpretation of Local Hero. But
so Hank Marvin, right?
Mark Knopfler.
Oh, but he does a live version with Hank Marvin.
Oh, possibly, yeah.
But
I don't know.
I have to look that up.
I'll have to have a look. Yeah, it's a great film, Local Hero. But so my father was a frustrated guitar player in that respect, and I think used me as a little bit of an excuse then. Once he realized that I was interested in guitar and that I was okay at it, he was like, oh, well, that's now my cue. I'm just going to buy the guitars that I've always wanted, but couldn't justify because I can't play them. So it was,
Did that feel as support, but also a little bit as pressure, like I have to do what my dad was not able to do?
No, it was never that. He was always, incredibly, as were both my parents, but my father being the kind of muso, being the massive music fan, there was always music on. The Beatles were his band in the sense that I think, like most people of his generation, my father was born in 1956. So living through Beatlemania, I think it would be physically impossible to have lived through that era and not have been monumentally affected by Beatlemania, So there was always music on, whether it was the Beatles, whether it was T-Rex, whether it was the Stones, whether it was Bob Dylan, whoever, all of the kind of classic stuff of that era. But no, it was never a pressure. It was just a case of being encouraging and, if this doesn't amount to a career, then no harm, no foul. We've got some cool guitars to show for it, So, he was amazing in that respect, as were, both my parents. I think I guess your kid saying to you that I want to be a rock star, or however I phrased it when I was, 14, it's quite a daunting prospect, I guess, because there's no career path. There's no kind of set trajectory that you take. It's
but
not.
What did he say then?
Totally supportive of it.
Wow.
Totally on side, and kind of. I think part of my kind of father's frustration with life generally was that my dad was a graphic designer by trade, so he kind of went to art school, went to art college. And was a very gifted artist, kind of, I think the fun was kind of taken out of graphic design for him to a degree when the Apple Mac came in, because everything was hand-drawn prior to that. Everything was letter set and, kind of very tactile and a very hands-on physical approach to design. And then obviously the Apple Mac comes in and kind of, for him at least, kind of felt like it sucked the soul out of it. But, my dad wanted to be a journalist, so we kind of share that in common. But I think my dad felt frustrated with, when he left graphic design, went through various jobs that his heart wasn't in particularly, and was frustrated, I think, to that extent, in the sense that kind of felt like he could have made more of his life, So that was something that he drilled into me from a very young age, was don't get to the point where you're frustrated. Don't feel like you've wasted your life, or that you've wasted a natural gift for something, or that you've wasted an opportunity,
Or that you're not doing the thing that you really like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, both my parents, my mother especially was a teacher by trade, was a special needs teacher, specializing in autism, which I guess again is quite a steady career. It's quite a defined path that you take to get to that point. So for her to be, and still be so encouraging of me doing what I do, which is, I can appreciate, quite an unusual way of making a living. I was immeasurably fortunate in that respect, because it really wouldn't have been, beyond the realms of expectation or unfair for my parents to say, especially after it took a number of years to get to a point where I started to see anything resembling the fruits of my labor, whether that was financial or whether it was whatever, just some sense of stability in life. It took a very long time to get to that point, and my parents would have been, quite within their, kind of rights to say, maybe it's time to get a real job, So, yeah, very, very fortunate in that respect, in that they were not only as encouraging as they were, but just accepting of the fact that, like, this is what he's got to do, and let him do it. You'll find a way.
Hey, before I forget, I have to ask, what did you do with that Rossetti guitar?
Oh, I still have it.
Yeah?
I still have it, yeah. I couldn't bear myself to part with that, because I thought that, maybe it's not as pivotal in my life as my Squier Telecaster, my first guitar, but in terms of the genesis of me being a guitar player, that's that guitar right there, So yeah, that's not going anywhere. That's going on the wall. So,
and if you'll sell it, it's like you get 20 quid.
Oh,
maybe,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah, there are things in life which are worth far more than their financial value. That is a prime example of that. So yeah, that's not going anywhere.
Hey, also quite in the beginning of your career, you got in touch with Alan Niven, right?
Yeah.
How did that go actually? Can you elaborate a little bit on?
Yeah, so that was an interesting one. I was a massive Guns N' Roses fan. Still am a huge Slash fan. Slash has been a kind of immeasurable influence on me in more ways than one. And I think it was, in hindsight, it was Guns N' Roses that Guns N' Roses were, to me, the Beatles to my father. It was the band that I really kind of hyper-focused on. Again, in clearing out my old bedroom recently, I'm just discovering boxes of, bootlegs and DVDs, all this Guns N' Roses stuff, which I acquired or kind of downloaded and burnt to disc as a kid. I was just fascinated with it. All of these horrific quality recordings of them playing the Marquee in London in 1987, all this kind of stuff. I loved it. I was really kind of immersed myself in it. And I think the reason for that was, it was as much as you can be influenced by your parents' music or your friends' music, I think when you discover a band for yourself, you develop this kind of closeness of a relationship with it, which you probably wouldn't have had otherwise. And for me, it was Guns N' Roses were that band. I remember hearing Mr. Brownstone, I think, bizarrely for the first time. It wasn't any of the big hits. It was, I think, inevitably would have been aware of Welcome to the Jungle or Sweet Child of Mine or Paradise City.
All songs on Appetite for Destruction are all phenomenal.
It's an impeccable album from start to finish. You would be incredibly hard pushed to kind of pick a weak track on that record. It's it's the barometer for me as a rock guitarist, I guess, principally, that you can make an album that good. When you were as young as they were as well, like Slash was 22 on that record, and this stuff that he played on that record, which I think, as long as I've got a hole in my ass, I'm not going to be able to play. It's just incredible. But
do you think he's an underrated guitarist, by the way?
It's, I guess, when you're as as famous and as instantly recognizable as Slash. I guess he's one of the few people on the planet whose silhouette is recognizable. You know,
but still, if you ask a lot of people who are the best guitar players in the world, Slash doesn't often come along. Right?
Well, that's the thing. I think it's the paradox of that situation is when you're as instantly recognizable as Slash is, the idea that you can be underrated in some respect almost seems like totally nonsensical. But for me, I would say yes. I think there's so much of what Slash does. I think Slash is hugely underrated as a rhythm player. You know, so much of the rhythm playing on Appetite for Destruction is great. And especially with Izzy as well, the interplay between those two guys was just, listening to that in stereo is an experience, you know. I've been on down a bit of a rabbit hole recently, especially with this whole AI able to kind of extract the stems out of music.
Oh yeah.
Doing that with Appetite and listening to the guitars isolated in essence as closely as I would have ever been able to, and hearing them kind of bouncing back and forth is amazing. So I do think he's underrated. I think he's massively underrated, but you know, while simultaneously being one of the most famous people on the planet, it's a bit of a paradox, but
we took a few sidetracks. Also, sorry for that, because Alan Niven, he was the manager for Guns N' Roses, right? So how did he cross your path?
So I was a huge Guns N' Roses fan, and consequently, I was doing two things. I was uploading videos of myself to YouTube, me in my bedroom just playing. There was a video of me doing Mr. Brownstone, bizarrely, when I was 14, 15. And I was also uploading Guns N' Roses demos, because this was, I guess, in the relative infancy of YouTube in terms of it being this kind of resource of everything. You know, you can pretty much find anything you want on YouTube these days. And I just became aware that there was this gaping hole of none of the Guns N' Roses demos that I'd accrued, all of the pre-production stuff they'd done for Appetite, all of these bootlegs, all of these kind of failed or aborted attempts at doing Appetite for Destructions with different producers, all this kind of stuff that was floating around in the internet that I downloaded. I just started uploading it. And one of those demos was labeled the Alan Niven demos. I never really got to the bottom of why that was. I don't know whether Alan had a hand in mixing them or producing them to some respect, but obviously he was brought on board by Geffen to try and whip them into shape and try and salvage any hope of getting the advance back that Geffen had ploughed in Guns N' Roses, you know, that had been misspent or wasted, I guess, ultimately. But I think purely through maybe Googling his own name or someone sending Alan an email saying this kid from Wales, you know, kind of throwing your name around online. Mm-hmm. Alan went on my YouTube channel, saw his name being used, but also saw me playing, and just dropped me an email and just kind of said, you know, hi, I'm the guy that you're mentioning on YouTube. Also, great playing. Keep at it. And it was a really curt, you know, kind of very short one-line email. And, you know, being the massive Guns N' Roses fan that I was, I knew Alan's name. I knew how pivotal he'd been to the Guns N' Roses story. You know, he took them from being a club band to a stadium band. You know, he was with them for that kind of stratospheric journey. So, very familiar with his name and just kept in contact with him. And I imagine, in hindsight, it was a massive pain in the arse to him, because I was just constantly peppering him with questions and picking his brains and asking how he'd done certain things and how to avoid the inevitable pitfalls of the industry and all this kind of stuff.
So you were already then both interested in playing the guitar, but also getting a career off the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, again, you know, it's just the cliche, I guess, of the industry from even when I was a kid. You know, it's not what it was. It's changed. It's, you know, there's no money in it anymore. All of these kind of things that you hear on a daily basis. So I think I've always been very cognizant of, if I'm going to do this, I can't just sit here and play guitar and wait for it to happen around me. I have to make this work myself, and I have to figure out a way of doing it on my own, you know, or at least as understanding as many facets of the industry as possible. If for nothing else, you're less likely to be, you know, kind of ripped off or taken for a mug or someone screw you over. So yeah, from a very early point, I was as kind of fascinated by the industry and the kind of the business side of it as much as I was the guitar playing side of it, you know, which is, as a reference, myself and Tom, you know, pretty much kind of do everything for the band in one way or another. You know, we have a manager, Cedric, but on a day-to-day level, like the journey now from Frankfurt to Tilburg this morning, for the 4.5, 5 hours that took, I designed the next merch drop, you know, sat in the back of the van, designing the merch and getting the website ready to be updated, you know, and I love it. It's the kind of the admin side of it and the business side of it is as fascinating to me as the actually getting on stage and playing in front of people, you know.
But when did it go from being a pain in the ass for Alan to okay, this kid, maybe I see something in him, and let's do something.
Yeah, I mean, he offered to manage the trio when the Tom Hollister trio kind of got off the ground. He offered to manage us, and it was always done on the kind of basis of, look, I've been out of the industry for a very long time, and I'm also in the middle of the Arizona desert. You're 5,000 miles away in South Wales, but if you want help, I'm willing to do that. Let's see what we can do. And he flew us over to Arizona, and we did a bit of recording over there. He got us a couple of shows and festivals back in the UK.
But you say, okay, but how was that, man? I mean, you're a kid flying to the United States.
Yeah, it was
like tell me.
It was cool. It was, I guess, inevitably there's things that you take for granted as a kid, and it was just, okay, well, as soon as I set my heart on this is what I want to do in life, it was never that I was kind of, don't know what the word would be, expectant. I guess you're pregnant if you're expectant. It was never though I was kind of expectatious of it, whatever the word would be. I never felt like it was owed to me. But at the same time, I was kind of like, well, this is the next step. Yeah. This is what happens.
That's interesting.
So just kind of taking it in my stride, and I don't think, I hope I'm not an arrogant person. I really don't think I'm an arrogant person or a kind of, but at the same time, I've always had a confidence in what I do. I know my strengths, I know my weaknesses, and I work to those. And, it's this idea of like imposter syndrome, which is obviously kind of people, reference very frequently. I think I'm lucky in that I've never really struggled with that. Even in the kind of biggest moments, whether it was playing the Royal Albert Hall with Peter Frampton, whether it was playing with Slash for the first time, whether it's signing record deals, all of these kind of milestones that you kind of go through. I think I've been very fortunate that I've never kind of found myself questioning at that point, why me? Mm-hmm. Because it's just, well, I've worked my bollocks off to get to this point. It's not that I feel like as though I'm owed this, but I kind of feel like the work that I've put in justifies me at the very least having got this far,
And how does that confidence, you think, reflect in your playing? Because, okay, this is the business side, but being confident about what you do you really feel like, okay, this note, it should just be there?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
That side of my kind of life, I guess, the playing side of it, the actual making of music, is much more subconscious. It's considerably less thought out or, kind of contrived, I guess, than every other aspect of my life, where, me and Tom joke with each other that we both overanalyze things, but between all of that, we hopefully get to the right or best decision in a business sense, or from a creative sense of where a track should go, or, what the middle eight should look like, or, whether it needs a solo or not. But when it comes to, I guess it's the antithesis of that, and it's to get on stage and just be totally free. Yeah. And again, have confidence in what I'm doing and know that, kind of people are here to see you. So, kind of make the most of that and enjoy it. But it's the one kind of area of my life, I guess, where I don't put a great deal of thought into it, because it always has been quite innate to a degree,
That is interesting. Somebody who's overanalyzing a lot of things, and indeed, because I mentioned, right, it's feel.
Yeah.
So this phrasing, and when you close your eyes, if I watch you play, I'm oh, you draw the audience, you take them along, but you're in this thoughtless zone, it seems, right?
It's a lot of people ask me about the kind of me closing my eyes when I play, and I think it's twofold. It's I think it helps me focus. I think it helps me focus purely on what I'm hearing, because so much of guitar playing for me these days, especially having just gone through 2,000 entries into the competition that we did to win one of my Rev Stars, to kind of promote the tour and promote our
somebody could win your guitar,
right?
Yeah,
basically, yeah. But we had 2,000 plus entries, and I kind of went through them all, every single one in their entirety, to kind of get to the point of being certain of, oh, well, this guy is the winner, Having just listened to 2,000 of those, it kind of really drives home that, it's music for me is a kind of, obviously it's a visual thing if you go to watch a band, but it's an oral thing first and foremost. It's something that you listen to, and if I'm watching my guitar too much, or I'm watching what I'm doing or anything like that, I think it just detracts from, I want to be following my ear ultimately, or my inner kind of melody, and inevitably, occasionally you'll have to look down as to kind of like, well, I know the note I want to go to, but I just need to double check how far I need to go to get to that note. But for the most part, it's trying to play melodically, and it's It's trying to play, just, be conscious of what is happening around you and the dynamics and the interplay between the rest of the band. And more often than not, the notes that I want to reach are never particularly far away from the other ones, So I don't really need to have my eyes open in that respect. Again, singers are huge influences for me. And singers don't really go in for that kind of acrobatic thing that a lot of guitar players or instrumentalists can do, where it's leaping about all over the fretboard or all over the, kind of keys or whatever. Notes tend to appear sequentially or kind of, in order almost. So it's just a case of, well, if I close my eyes, that focuses me on what I should really be doing, which is trying to play with, with feel, whatever that is, and or kind of at the very least melodically or lyrically, fluidly. I guess
just reminds me that as a teenager, I used to listen to albums, Appetite for Destruction, with lying down with my eyes closed.
Oh yeah,
That's
same.
what
I
used to do, man.
Absolutely. That's still,
I don't do it anymore, actually, but I should.
I'm with a 4-year-old around. I daren't close my eyes at any point because I'm going to be smacked in the face or have something drop from a great height on me. But no, honestly, that's one of life's joys is sticking a record on in darkness, whether you're in bed with headphones on or whatever, and just listening to it and kind of losing yourself in it. I think you appreciate it on a different level, and I guess it's, that is borne out by the fact that if you look at any record on Spotify or any record on Apple Music or whatever streaming service, irrespective of how great the record is, the further it goes down the record, the lower the streams for the tracks. Because you have to, and as a consequence, we've just finished our record and we've been talking about the album order. And you have to kind of, what's it called? Like front loading the record, where you basically put all of the better tracks or the tracks that you have more confidence in towards the top of the record, which I think for me is often at the detriment of the flow and the vibe and the feel of the record, because you have the better ones towards the start. You don't get the gems later on so much, but people's attention span isn't there. People don't have the time that they maybe had years ago to just stick on a record and listen to it from top to bottom. And maybe it's because they haven't paid for it. Maybe it's because it wasn't a big investment as it would have been with a vinyl or with a CD or with a cassette. I think back to, being a kid and going to record shops and buying a record, and on the drive home, just being fascinated by this, and kind of looking at every bit of it, trying to figure out if there were any bits that were just about too small to read on the liner notes or whatever. And you don't get that anymore. And I think consequently the liner notes you say, like for me that was a big thing to actually explore. And I should check out this bass player. Yeah.
Right. And
again, so much of the stuff that I discovered as a kid was by reading liner notes and figuring out, well, who produced this record? What else has he produced? Because if he produced this record and I like this album, what else has he done? I'll probably like that as well,
Well, we have AI for that now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We've got AI for everything. But I think, consequently, because you don't have to physically buy music anymore, the value of it, the inherent value of it has gone down. And it's not given the time, I guess, that it would have been given in years gone by, So irrespective of whether it's us or whether it's Taylor Swift, you look at any album on Spotify, it will get progressively lower streams as it goes on. And I think that's sad, I think it's just the way people digest music has fundamentally changed, It's it's a shame, but I sound like an old man shouting at the clouds. So,
hey, old man, I would like to talk with you about your playing a bit more, because you mentioned the word acrobatics just before.
Yeah.
You have some insane chops, but you're never really a shredder, right?
No.
And I was wondering, okay, was that maybe then deliberate? Like, okay, I'm not going to be the shredder, fastest player or whatever.
Yeah.
My strength is to put it all into that feel, so to say.
I think it's inevitably you are a kind of culmination of your influences, and even thinking back to very early influences of music that was on around the house, it was Clapton. If thinking back to specific guitar music, it was Rory Gallagher, it was Stevie Ray, it was Clapton, it was like blues based kind of feel based stuff, I guess. But I remember a very specific moment of being a kid, really getting into music for the first time. And it's an amazing point in your life because all of this music is new music, whether it's Van Halen, whether it's Thin Lizzy, whether it's Led Zeppelin, it's Aerosmith, it's Guns N' Roses, all of these bands that you've never really heard before. And just going out to a record shop, spending all of my pocket money, all of the money I'd been given, for doing odd jobs around the house on CDs, and then just going and voraciously devouring them and discovering all of this music. And I remember on one day I bought the best of Thin Lizzy and the best of Van Halen. Put on the best of Thin Lizzy, and I think Boys in Back in Town was the first track on there, and just kind of grooving out and vibing to that, and then sticking on the best of Van Halen, and Eruption was the first track on there, and it's a masterpiece. Eruption is an incredible bit of innovative guitar playing. I think for me, Eddie, probably alongside Jimmy, in terms of the two most innovative modern electric guitar players, I guess. But that said, I didn't really recognize what I was hearing as electric guitar. Boys in Back in Town, I just stick that on, and at the very least I can go, that's an A chord. I can play an A chord, away I go. Eruption, I'm like, I don't even know where to start with that. I have a Telecaster, it doesn't have a tremolo bar, and I think that, in hindsight, was a fairly pivotal moment in terms of like, well, I'll go in that direction. I'll kind of, it's Lizzie, it's Clapton, it's Rory Gallagher, it's Stevie Ray.
Eddie inspired you not to go into the shredders.
That's the headline.
Yeah.
But, I'm a huge Van Halen fan, and there's some seminal moments in there, which I'll still happily stick on all the time. But I think it was a fairly big moment for me in terms of kind of dictating my trajectory or my path to a degree.
Yeah. But some listening to something like that can also make you realize, okay, it's super cool, but it's not me.
It's not me, yeah. And I think, again, you are a product of your influences, and the stuff that I'd been listening to around the house, was very much more simple music, I guess, kind of less involved and less kind of virtuosic or kind of crazy, I guess, ultimately. And, that probably dictated the path that I took, and I heard Thin Lizzy, and I heard Bell Bottom Blues, and I heard Messing with the Kid, all of these kind of tracks, and gravitated towards that because that really resonated with me, because it was stuff that I kind of felt like I'd kind of heard before in some respect, with my parents' music. So I don't know.
But because, like I said, there are some insane chops in there as well. What intrigues me is the way you use your pick.
Yeah,
because it goes in and out, and I'm like, he seems like a magician. How you hold it sometimes.
It's the only thing in my life that I can do, which is even virgin on dexterous, because everything else I'm a bit cack-handed or clumsy. So my wife would attest to as much, smashing things left, right, and centre. But I think, again, in hindsight, funnily enough, during this conversation, under the table, I felt that my nail was cracked. My index fingernail on my right hand was cracked. So I was just kind of subconsciously peeling off the bit which was broken. And that is quite relevant, because that nail, for whatever reason, I went through a phase when I went through a big punk rock phase, kind of after Guns N' Roses started getting into like the Offspring and Blink, all the kind of current stuff, I guess, for that period, which is obviously all kind of like ba 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 ba. And for whatever reason, ditched the pick. I would have been about 14, 15 and started playing that with my index finger, with the nail on my index finger. And I don't know whether it's just hereditary or whether it's as a consequence of that period, but consequently my nail just on that finger refuses to grow. It just snaps off. Like a wet Kit Kat at the first sign of trouble, just breaks. So fast forward a couple of years when I started getting into the idea of playing with my fingers a little bit more dexterously and a little bit more kind of interestingly than just using it in place of a black drum. That is worse than useless. The moment that touches a string, it just bends, it wants to break, it's terrible. So I thought, well, it's as good as a useless digit at this point. What can I do? Well, I'll just use that to hold the plectrum. So I tap my finger up, pick goes up in the kind of crevice or crease of my finger, I guess, and then it's this kind of claw motion of like thumb for the bass strings, middle finger and ring finger for the treble strings.
Yeah.
So that kind of, back and forth kind of action. It was, I guess it was a conscious thought process in the sense that I kind of taught myself to do that, but it was never particularly done because, this will give me dynamic capabilities or textural capabilities, that I won't have otherwise. It was just something that I kind of started doing. And then almost, kind of after the fact, realized the benefits of that,
Happy mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, looking at kind of influences and realizing almost, as I said, after the fact, oh, they do that. Or maybe I'd subconsciously noticed that they were playing with their fingers, whether it is Derek Trucks or whether it's Mark Knopfler or whether it's Jeff Beck, whoever, looking at those guys and go, oh, they actually don't use their fingers or use a pick some of the time, you know. So yeah, it's a big part of my playing. I get accused sometimes of doing it for show or doing it for visual dramatic effect. I think that's probably because obviously when I started dabbling in YouTube, obviously the camera is kind of fairly hyper focused on what's happening with my left hand and my right hand because of the angle that I shot it from. You get a lot of attention on that, and people think it's, you know, unnecessary some of the time or whatever. I mean, I don't know at this point, to be honest. It's just a part of my playing. It's just an inherent part of what I do, and I don't really give it too much thought. Again, like I said, everything I play is kind of subconscious, and I kind of want to keep it that way because I guess thus far my musical instincts seem to have served me relatively well. So I guess part of me is scared that, well, the moment you start to analyze that to the degree that you analyze everything else in your life, it might undermine it. It might take away that kind of spark of whatever it is. If there is anything interesting about my playing, you know, I think it's because it's innate and because it's inherent and because it's something which happens without giving it too much thought. So
I talked with Mike Dawes about nails as well. So he has a good pedicure.
Oh,
if you might ever mind.
Absolutely.
Around your corner.
It's shocking. Honestly, it just snaps all the time. So it's good for nothing really, apart from holding a plectrum. So,
hey, to wrap this up, what's the upcoming year going to be like for you guys?
It's going to be a very busy year, actually. So as I mentioned earlier, we've just booked our next UK tour for this time next year. We're in the US. Again, all of that's being confirmed at the moment, but it'll be pretty much a month spent going coast to coast next year. We've just signed with WME, William Morris, a huge agency in the US. We've just signed a record deal, or we're in the process of signing a record deal, so I won't jinx that just yet. But there's a lot happening at the moment. So next year, we'll be back out in Europe at some point as well, probably after the UK tour. We're looking at coming back out to Germany and the Netherlands again, and Austria and Italy and kind of maybe France. We're going to try and bite off a lot of stuff next year. You know, it's going to be a big year, I think.
Final question, because I didn't ask that. Tom Alistair Trio and now Cardinal Black. Is that a coincidence that it has your initials, this band?
Do you know what? It is a total coincidence. The first time I realized that was when we launched Tell Me How It Feels, which was our first single. And we chose to do that entirely cold. It was none of the usual preamble that you get with a band of, you know, big things coming soon, all this kind of stuff. We thought, well, I guess one of the few advantages of having an online presence, having had the YouTube channel, having, you know, used Instagram, Facebook, whatever, was that, well, straight away there's going to be a little bit of intrigue in it. There's going to be more interest in it than if I was just launching this without any kind of following, you know, as most bands do. So I thought, well, we'll do it totally cold, but just put it up on a Friday evening. Instead of my usual Friday Fretworks, it'll be, hey, here's my new band. See if you like it. And when I was changing what they call it, the kind of favicon, or the little emblem that you have on YouTube to kind of represent your channel that appears and goes up and down in the right-hand corner of the video, I think was a picture of me, maybe, or something very specific to me. So I thought, oh, I'll change that to the band's initials, CB. And it was genuinely only when I changed it to CB, I was like, oh, that's my initials. So, it was genuine total coincidence.
But, it's the Chris book band.
Yeah. And I'm sticking to that story. So,
hey, Chris, thanks so much for your time.
Man, honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure. This is, the most fun interview I've ever done. So, thanks, man.
Thanks. Hey, and listeners, thanks for listening. And make sure to check Chris Buck's music out.
Or don't. You're not missing much.
Oh, you are. Hey, Chris, thank you.
Thank you, man. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.